This is Biology 2, Chapter 24, Part 2 on Intro to Animals. In this portion of the video lecture, we will be discussing different animal body plans and symmetry. Because we have a lot of animals that live in a lot of different types of environments and habitats, kind of the evolution of the animal body plan, those features and characters of animal groups kind of represent the branching off points on the evolutionary tree. Remember, the kingdom Animalia kind of has one branch, but all the separate branches that form from that kind of show how animals have evolved to live in the environments that they do. Here we have a cladogram of the different animal groups, taking a look at the number of adaptations that would have had to happen in order to get the several different animal groups that we have. The simpler animals of the sponges, cnidarians, flatworms, roundworms, rotifers, they have very simple body plans. Once you get into the mollusks and the annelids, arthropods, echinoderms, and the chordates, then you start to develop some more complex body plans. Symmetry is in science, in biology, is going to mean balance among structures of organisms. Anything that's symmetrical is balanced. Some animals, in fact just one, have no symmetry whatsoever. There's no balance, there's no order amongst the body plan, and those are the sea sponges. Sponges can grow in any numerous amount of shapes. They are the most simple of all animals, so it would make sense that they wouldn't have much of a body plan as of yet. Radial symmetry is another type of animal symmetry. If you think of like a bike tire and the center of it, the axle with all the spokes coming out of that, that's like radial symmetry. Or if you take a pie and you slice it into a bunch of pieces, that's radial symmetry. So radial symmetry can divide the animal along any plane through a central axis. So you can cut it up nice and evenly into pieces. From a top-down view, for example, a jellyfish has radial symmetry. Since it's nice and circular, just kind of like a pie, you can cut that into any type of plane along a central axis. Starfish also are animals with an example of radial symmetry. Most complex animals have what's called bilateral symmetry. Remember, bi means two, so bilateral symmetry is where we take the body and divide it into mirror images through one central axis. So you'll have roughly the same thing on one side of the line, of the dividing line, as you would the other. So any animal with a backbone, a chordate animal, will have bilateral symmetry. Also, some insects, for example, the butterfly, you can divide that down its middle and it's got similar wings on one side, one antenna on one side, one on the other. So bilateral symmetry also is what people have. So we have one eye on the right and one eye on the left, one arm on the right, one arm on the left, etc. Now, interiorly speaking, we're not exactly bilaterally symmetry. We have, for example, your heart is a little more on the left side of your body, and the liver is a little more on the right side of the body. But in general, if you split us right down the middle, we look the same on both halves. So in order for animals to be this complex moving and thinking group that we are, we need to figure out which end is up. So cephalization is where we define a head and a tail end through development. There are some anatomical terms that you'll need to be familiar with because we will be discussing these, especially when we start our fetal pig dissections at the end of this unit. But if you want to define a head and a tail or a top and a bottom end through development, there's a couple of different ways you can do this. An anterior posterior view of cephalization. Anterior means towards the head. The term superior can also be used. And posterior refers to the tail end. and the term inferior can also be used there. So if you were to cut an animal in half at the crossways at the belly button line, you get a top end and a bottom end. So that's anterior and posterior. Now, to define the front and the back, we could take a cut right through the long ways, right through the middle of an animal to get its dorsal or back side, or the side that's closest to the spine, and the ventral or the underside of the animal, or what's closest to the belly. So here we have an anterior, posterior, and ventral dorsal view. So anterior, posterior, you cut the organism right in the middle there, the short ways, so you have the top head end and the bottom or tail end. And then for frontsies and backsies, we would take a nice long cut right through the midline of the body there, so we get the ventral or belly side and the dorsal or the back side. Now, because animals are complex and we have complex organ systems and tissues, we had to develop a place to hold all of these things. So body cavities were needed to be developed. A coelomate animal is an animal that has a tissue-lined body cavity that encloses all of the organs. True coelomate animals are kind of a tube within a tube. So this coelom allows specialized organs to develop among the complex animal groups. A very simple animal with a complex body plan, believe it or not, is the earthworm. You can see there that the endoderm, the very inner layer of tissue, is completely separated from the ectoderm and the mesoderm. So it is kind of an inner tube within a tube. Some animals don't have quite a full tube. They are a pseudo-coelomate, because pseudo in Latin means fake or phony. So this type of body cavity is kind of incomplete. At some points, there isn't an actual enclosure of the tube, so this will limit tissue and organ system development. Roundworms are a good example of a pseudo-coelomate. They have a body cavity, it's fluid-filled, but again, there's not that true separation of the inner tube compared to the rest of the tubes. And some animals, very simple ones, have no body cavity. They are an acoelomate. So they're just solid flesh between their gut and their body wall. A flatworm is an example of an acoelomate. Flatworms breathe through their skin, they digest food through their skin, and they also reproduce through their skin. So acoelomates have just layers of tissue, that ectoderm, endoderm, and mesoderm, between their gut and their body wall, so they don't have a true digestive system. When we talked about the gastrula a little bit earlier, and we talked about the first hole that was made there as an opening, could be either the mouth or the anus. A protostome is an animal where the mouth develops as the first opening, and a deuterostome is where the opening in the gastrula, that first hole, becomes the anus. And believe it or not, people are deuterostomes. And basically the development of them are the same. It's just kind of the fate of the blastopore, that hole kind of is reversed between protostomes and deuterostomes. Segmentation is another animal characteristic that leads to complex body structure. When you're segmented, you have lots of repeating similar parts. Most segmented animals can survive damage to a segment in most cases, and some can even regenerate or regrow those segments. For animals, especially without a backbone, so invertebrate animals, it makes for very effective movements. So insects and arthropods and the like are segmented. So it's repeating body patterns. It's very easy in the DNA instructions to make a body part and just hit the repeat button. And in some cases, like I mentioned, they can either survive that damage or actually regrow or regenerate new parts. This has been Chapter 24, Part 2 of Intro to Animals.